Hey everybody, my name is Luke. I'm going to be showing you guys a little experiment that I'm going to be doing with a brisket here today. We are going to smoke it. The difference here is that I'm going to be trying out the Hooters seasoning that we've got here. This stuff goes pretty good on, been using it on burgers. So I'm going to give it a shot on a brisket here as well. I am going to add a little bit of pepper to it as well because I think that this just isn't a little this just isn't peppery enough for me, but I think the salt content's pretty good on it, so we're gonna give that a shot and see how it turns out. All right, so this is a full packer brisket, which means that it's got both the flat and the point on it. I did pick this up at Costco. It is a choice grade, which for a brisket, I think the minimum that you wanna look at is at least a choice grade. It's all that I had available at Costco. Otherwise, I would have gotten a prime. That means that it's got a little bit more intramuscular fat, which is perfect for a brisket because it keeps it moist. This one is 16.19 pounds. It cost me about $65. So not a bad deal. The prime would probably run closer to like $80, but not a bad deal for what it is. So let's go ahead and start unpacking it here. I do like to use rubber gloves. And then a little trick that I'll show you all too, so that you don't get your seasonings all covered with meat, is you can put them also in a little rubber glove here. And then when you're done with it, you can just take it right off. So you kind of want to cut this package open from the fat side, because if you nick the fat, it's not as big of a deal as if you were to get the meat side. So I typically open it from this side here. It's popped open. And then we're gonna get this bad boy all trimmed up. So my workstation is a little small for this, but we will make it work. So you can really start from either side that you want, but there's a lot that you're gonna remove here. And the things that you can do with the removed parts are pretty endless. I typically will make some ground beef out of it. Some of this fat that I cut off. I also render it down to make some good tallow. And I usually do that on the smoker as well. It gives it a nice smoky flavor, but it's gonna be a pretty decent amount that we're going to trim off here. So I by no means am a professional at this at all. So if you guys see me making mistakes, it's obviously because I'm not a professional cook. I am just the backyard smoker here. But in my experience, which I've made about 10 of these before, other than the first couple, they've turned out pretty well. So I guess I must be doing something right. But I think that this will be a valuable little perspective from someone who is not a professional. And there's that. So let's go ahead and start trimming this thing. All right, guys, so let's get started with trimming. This is not the best looking brisket that I've seen. In my experience, this is, again, not the best one that I've had, but we can make it work. What you want to typically look for is a brisket that's got a thick lean. We're going to cut a lot of this off anyway. That's where your ground beef is going to come from. But you want to find one that's got a thick lean, which isn't always the easiest, especially when they're in these cryo backpacks. But you want to find one that's got a thick lean and just kind of as uniform as possible. This point side is always thicker, but we're going to trim that down and get it more even. It helps for it to cook a lot more even on the smoker itself. I'll be probing on both sides, but we'll get to that a little bit later. So I'm going to start from this side with trimming. There's a big, they call this the decal, I believe. Big just lump of fat. And we're gonna just get rid of all of that because that's not going to be the most edible thing to eat. So we're gonna get rid of that. We're gonna get rid of more of that later here. I just wanna get some of the more outstanding pieces. Like this part here on the flat, let's actually trim this down now. So this is super thin. You want to get rid of this. So I just kind of score it. And that part's getting pretty thick towards the end there, so I'm gonna straighten out there and get that all off. You're gonna notice that there's like some spots that are a little bit more brown. That is from the cryovac packaging. So I usually just get rid of that. It's usually not a lot of the meat, so I cut that off. I can trim this down while I'm here. That way it gets to go into the meat grinder a little bit easier. Might even trim that down more later on. For right now, that's okay. Looks like this, I don't know if I did that or not, but we're gonna nick that off as well. Little pieces like this will burn up. It's not the end of the world if you don't take it off, but I want to make a nice clean shape here. So this is kind of squared off. Take a little bit more off, make it a little bit more circular. And then what I'm gonna do is fling this over, and see, you can see how it's all browned out there. That's again from that cryo vacuuming. So we're gonna trim this whole side off. It's gonna give us a better look at how thick the fat is here compared to the meat. And we're gonna be taking a lot of this off, it looks like, but that's okay. So keep working on it here. That's okay, we can keep that. Turn this back over. This here too, you want to get rid of that. That's not going to cook well, and that's just straight up fat. We'll render that down for some tallow later on. We'll make a whole separate video on making tallow at some point. This is just going to be for the brisket itself. Key thing here too is the knife that you're using. So this is a boning knife. It's a pretty cheap one I got from Amazon. I think it was about 20 bucks. Makes the job a whole lot easier. You always want to make sure that your knives are sharp, because otherwise you run the risk of cutting yourself if you're working with a dull knife, which I know sounds backwards, but you got a better chance of doing it when it's dull. I'm gonna get to all this silver skin here as well, but I'm gonna keep working on this here. So I'm gonna probably come in here like this, take some more of that fat off. And as you can see, guys, this is just straight up fat. This is a big pocket that goes in there. So we're gonna remove that because that's not gonna be something that most people are gonna wanna eat. So it's just gonna take a little bit of time to dig in there and try not to get all the meat. As you might be able to tell now too, it's already starting to look more uniform from top to bottom there, which is what we're going for. This is going to be a nice deep cut here. Just all fat, got a little bit of meat, but mostly fat there. And again, this is from the flat part, I'm sorry, the point part of it, which is that thicker part. So taking this down to make it more level with the flat is gonna be a big help for you when this thing's on the smoker. This kind of stuff here, this hanging flap, you wanna take that off because it is going to burn up in the smoker, which some people like that, but I'll get rid of that later. Some people like that, but it can get really dry when you do that way. So we're gonna take it down. It's another nice just chunk of meat, but again, it's pointing out, it's sticking out, so we wanna take that off. That'll make great ground beef, which you can use to make burgers, tacos. I find that with the burgers, you're gonna wanna mix it with some other kind of beef as well. Because for me, in my experience, the brisket tends to not hold together very well and fall apart. So you're probably gonna wanna mix that with some chuck. Just just want to follow along where you can kind of see the meat and the fat. You want to try to not get all the way down to meat. You want to maintain this fat cap as much as possible too, to that 1/4 inch area there. I think that's looking pretty decent here on this side. We'll probably flip this over again too, and I'll be looking at it a few times. Let's work on this fat piece here now. You guys can see I'm kind of going in on an angle with this knife to get a good cut. I'm going to try to come in on the bottom side. Same thing here. See how it can kind of separate now. Just use the tip of the knife, slice in and make some room there. There's still a lot of fat in there, which again, this won't cook down before the rest of the brisket does. And you'll be burning your brisket just to get this stuff. All right, so still working on this fat here. I'm gonna keep trying to gouge in there, get some more of that out. This little plateau that forms out of this, I think I'm gonna leave it like that. I know it's probably gonna cook up a lot faster than the other pieces. I think that's okay though. It'll create some, what I think are gonna be burnt ends. I'm gonna trim this back a little bit. But as you can see, we're kind of getting closer to the pieces being more uniform. Yeah, I'm definitely gonna leave that plateau as is. It's gonna definitely burn up a little bit more, but I think that's okay. That creates some good pieces that some people like. And what I'm doing here now is just kind of rounding off the back. Which again, first time that I did this, I was like, that is a lot of meat to take off, but as long as you end up using that meat for something, that's okay. Now, there's a lot of this fat that's up at the top here. I'm gonna take that down. I don't really need that. I just gouged a little more meat than I would like, but I just keep in mind that this is not a professional setup here, not a restaurant, not a competition. So at the end of the day, this will be just fine. Now, I've seen some people get really aggressive with taking the silver skin off. Silver skin tends to be some really chewy stuff, but I've usually just taken off the more major chunks, and I've never gotten any sort of chewy piece that is not the most ideal thing to eat, so I'm pretty laid back with how much I take off of it. But for the video, I'll just kind of show you all what you want to do. You want to work with the grain as well. Kind of just stick the point of the knife underneath there and just start slicing it back. And as you can see there, I keep going to toss that in my grind pile, but I don't really want that in my grind pile. As you can see, again, taking off more meat than I'd like, but it's not the end of the world. This here, you can leave this as is. I'm just Just gonna round it off because it looks a little bit nicer that way. At least I think. And not like we're wasting this meat that will be used. So let's take a look. Here looks like that's still a pretty thick amount of fat, so we're gonna come back and trim that down, and then probably get a little bit more, hoping you guys can see this, get a little bit more of this side, but I think we're on the home stretch here. So gouged that a little bit more than I like, but that's okay. The more I look at this little plateau here, I don't know how that's gonna work out, but I'm gonna leave it because I said I would. Now, get a little bit more off of that side, that's okay. Key thing is, again, is don't be afraid to take off what you think needs to be taken off. It's gonna make for a better product in the end. When you're spending this kind of money on meat, you don't wanna cheap out and leave stuff on there that isn't gonna be good for the final product. Scraggly piece hanging off there. Move this all back a little bit. That's another big fat pocket. I think this is that part of the decal. Take that back. That's not going to be tasty. I will say though, that marbling, this is the point, so it is the fattier part, but that is some pretty nice looking marbling, I will say. So basically where I'm at now is I'm just kind of putting the finishing touches and working the parts where they're just kind of sticking out of place, shouldn't be there. Straighten this out a little bit more. Clean that up. That's fine. One last look over. And that is how an amateur trims a brisket. Alright, so what we're going to do next here is go ahead and start seasoning this. I don't normally use a binder, but in this case, because I'm using two different seasonings, I am going to use mustard as a binder. This isn't going to add to the flavor, so you don't have to be worried about that, especially if you don't like mustard as a taste. But it's gonna help the seasoning stick. And when you're using two, I think it's gonna be a little bit better for the finished product, because that Hooters seasoning doesn't have a whole lot of pepper in it. So I'm gonna add some of my own that I picked up from Costco. It's just a coarse grind. Here a lot of people use a 16 mesh, I'm not sure. This is exactly that, but that's what I'm using. Go a little bit more to get on these sides, very important. We'll talk about this in a second, but you want to always make sure that you do season the sides. A little bit more. This mustard does not want to cooperate with me today. As you can see, you can get pretty messy, and That's why these gloves on the seasoning bottles help out a lot with cleanup. Flip it over. You want to do the same thing on the other side. Just lathering it in and making sure you got full coverage here. All right, now we change my gloves. Again, Hooters seasoning. The main ingredients in here is salt, dehydrated garlic, and some dehydrated onion. So reading this, it actually doesn't even look like it has any pepper. So that's, I don't know what those black things in there are, but either way, looks like there is no pepper. So that's why I'm adding some pepper of my own in this. And I think we should be able to get this to stick pretty well. But essentially when you're eating a brisket, you're getting slices. So the seasoning for the most part is what's on the outside. And when you get thin slices, you want to make sure that you have a decent amount of seasoning there, because most of the flavor and taste, aside from the smoke, is going to come from that external layer. So this is what I'm going to do here. I've not done this before, so I'm just going to kind of guess at how much pepper I'm going to need. But I do like a peppery brisket, so the traditional seasoning for brisket, if they call it Texas style, is some coarse pepper like this, as well as some kosher salt and garlic powder. And I have a mix that I picked up from the internet. 2 parts pepper, 2 parts salt, 1 part garlic powder. And this is the pepper that I use in that mixture. Once again, important, like I said, get those sides. So what you want to do is you want to lift it like this so that it gives you an angle to season there. Awkward angle here, but we'll make it work. We'll get it when we're on the other side. Pepper, now the star of the show. This has some, this stuff is really small, really loose, and it's got some big holes, so just want to be careful. But the pepper does make it hard to see how much of this stuff you're putting down. So kind of try to keep track of where you're at, so that again, you're not over seasoning. It's gonna be hard to over season this, but it's definitely possible. So and try to mind what you're doing with that. Oops. A little extra poured out there. No big deal. Okay. Meat side looks good. Flip it back over. Add some seasoning come off or some pepper come off. So I'm going to come back in here and cover that up again. Good, and then back with the Hooters. So yeah, this Hooters seasoning has the elements of a typical brisket rub. Something about it just makes for good burgers, at least. So I can't imagine that it would make a brisket any worse. But that's a seasoned brisket now. What I'm gonna do next is I'm gonna put this on a wire rack, a baking sheet, and this is gonna go sit in the fridge until tonight. So it's about 1 o'clock here. We're gonna probably come back about 9, 10 o'clock, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the smoker, my process with that, and then get it put on, close the lid, and let it go. All right, so like I said, next thing that we're gonna do is just go ahead and just put this on a wire rack. I'm going, I guess, meat side down. I don't know if it's gonna make a big difference, but the main thing that you wanna do is make sure that this is elevated so that you're getting airflow underneath the entire brisket itself. So that salt is gonna start drawing out moisture from the brisket, but then it's gonna suck it back in. So you'll notice sometimes a little bit of liquid at the bottom of this pan after you take it out, but the salt is absorbing through the meat portion of it, which is gonna help flavor the actual beef on the inside so that you're not just getting that flavor on the outside. Most of it will come from the outside, but once that salt absorbs, you're gonna get that salty taste from the inside as well. So next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just go into my basement fridge and get this put in there and see you guys again tonight. All right, so like I said, here it is. I'm gonna go ahead and just pop this in the fridge. And let that take a break. Again, see you guys tonight. All right guys, so you might be able to tell here, the weather is not cooperating with me. It is raining, so we're gonna just go ahead and throw this on here. This is Camp Chef DLX 24. It is a pellet smoker. You guys might be able to tell. I am using a tube for this as well to get a little bit more extra smoke on there. We are gonna toss the brisket on kind of in the center. I'll make another video about kind of how you want to position food, but right now, in this case, because it's raining and we got to get out of the elements, I'm gonna just put it on the center for right now, and I'm gonna do that fat side up. That way, when that fat is melting, it's kind of pooling into the brisket itself and flavoring it more. We're on a high smoke setting, so that's typically going to keep it between somewhere of 220 and 230, and it's going to make as much smoke as possible. So the pellet smoker, you need as much as you can get. It doesn't produce as much smoke. So I'm going to toss this on right now and get to it. The point side is going to be closer to the smoke tube over here because it's going to have a little bit more heat. The point can take that a little bit better. And the flat side is going to go away from that. I'm also going to probe this, both the flat as well as the point. That way I can get a measurement of what each side of the meat is doing. I want to kind of just get this right in the center of both of these. That should be good. I'm using a Govee wireless thermometer. It's gonna tell me, let me move this over for you guys so you guys can kind of see the setup. It's gonna give me alerts as to what the temperatures are. If the smoker turns off for whatever reason, it'll let me know that as well. Wake me up from my sleep because it is about 10 o'clock at night right now. I expect to not have to do anything until about 8 in the morning. So that should be the next time that we all see each other here. So for now, good night. All right, so said that I shouldn't be looking at this until about 8 a.m. Well, the brisket decided it had other plans. 230 is the temperature of the smoker. 153 is the temperature of the point. 178 is the temperature of the flat. So that's getting pretty close to where you want to wrap this. Now that is a pretty big differential between the flat and the point, but I've had this happen before, not a big deal. Once we wrap it up, they typically tend to even out, so not too concerned about that. We've got a little shot here of what it's looking like so far. I think I like how that's looking and how that's turning out at this point. I've got a probe temperature here. I'm gonna double check it myself, and that is getting soft and nice. So that flat part there is probing in about just about what it said on the wireless thermometer. Flat here, which is getting a lot closer to being done. Same thing, that temperature is just about checking out here. This pool fat here, generally want to avoid that, but at this point there's not much I can do about it. It is what it is. It's not gonna be the end of the world, but that's looking pretty good. So what I'm gonna do next here is bring this inside and get it wrapped up. It is 5 in the morning, about 3 hours earlier than I expected this to be happening, but no big deal. We gotta improvise sometimes. So let's go ahead and get this brisket wrapped up. First thing that I'm gonna do here is put down some Wagyu tallow, which is just basically fat from Wagyu here. Helps with the flavor. This is gonna melt down pretty quickly once I get this brisket put over it. So that's gonna be where the brisket sits. And we're gonna get some tallow here as well. Put it right on the beef. Get that all wrapped up, get this lathered in. So yeah, that temperature disparity between the point and the flat, right now I'm not too concerned about it. I think once this gets back on the smoker and wrapped up in here, it's gonna help kind of even that temperature out. I think it'll be just fine, but first let's focus on getting this thing wrapped. Get this stuff out of the way now. This is just pink butcher paper here. What I'm gonna do, fold the first flap kind of over there. Here. Kind of like a little Christmas present right in time for Christmas here. And the key thing here is you want to make sure that you are wrapping this tight. If you don't wrap this tight, you're going to be letting heat get out, and you're going to force the cook to go longer than it needs to. You want to make sure that this is getting wrapped tight. Now once you've got those ends folded over, flip it over. Fix it there, pull that back. Alright, there's your little brisket package. Pretty nice and tight in there. This is going to go back on the smoker now. I expect that this is going to take at least another couple of hours, and then it's going to go into a cooler to rest for a few hours at least before we get into slicing this. So let me go ahead and get this tossed back on the smoker, and I'll see you guys a little later. Alright, so I've taken the brisket off of the smoker now. I've got it in a cooler. There's a towel underneath there. The brisket obviously still wrapped. And then another towel over the top. Just kind of filling the gaps there. We're gonna close this up. Just let this now rest in there for probably at least 6-7 hours. It's gonna still be warm when we pull it out, so no worries there. Talk about the times and temps and some other observations from this smoke during that time. Might even make another video just to kind of illustrate what to look out for, what you may run into, and how you can improvise. But for now, I'm gonna let this just rest and then come back to it a little later. All right guys, so this has now been resting in a cooler, wrapped in towels for about 6 hours. We're gonna go ahead and get in here and see how it turned out. Tell this is soaked. Get some good beef fat here. It's gonna get real messy, so I'm laid out with a bunch of paper towels here. It's not gonna be enough, but it is what it is. Place in here. So let's get to it and see. You want to always separate the flat from the point because they are two different muscles and they run differently here. All right, that is looking pretty juicy. A little bit of a smoke ring there, not too bad. Not too pronounced, but not too bad. Smoke tube actually went out. Actually, towards the beginning of the cook. I should have went and checked on it, but went out. That's all right. That is pretty tender, I will say. It is just falling apart. Get a little taste here. Not bad. I will say though, the Hooters seasoning doesn't taste all that different than just a regular rub. It's good, but not all that different. All right, let's get a cut of the point here. Oh, another nice piece there. Look at that. Look at all that intramuscular fat there. Fat's nice and yellow there too that you can see up at the top. That means it's cooked down. This could have probably, I don't know that we could have removed that, but most people won't want to eat that. But the point definitely, it's still tender. It's definitely edible. But could have probably used a little bit more time. But the flat was done, so we had to pull it. Otherwise, it would have dried the flat out. Here's that plateau I was testing out. Not bad either. So that's a basic pellet smoker. All right guys, so as you can see, it turned out pretty good. Flavor's pretty good. It's nice and tender, which is what I was hoping for and expecting. So that's gonna do it for today's video. I'm probably gonna do another follow-up video here just to kind of go over some of the things that I observed with this smoke, but that'll be for another video. Thanks for watching here, and I'll see you in the next one.